policy analysis and host of the Kremlin File podcast. It's great to have both of you with us. Ben, I'll start with you. You're obviously one of our resident experts on misinformation and disinformation. Putin has been a one-man fake news industry lately, and we've been talking about Russian bots for years. I mean, this country perfected the art of disinformation. How effective is his current disinformation network in this war, and how bad can it get?
Yeah, it's focused internally. It's focused nationally in Russia right now. If there is an international campaign going on right now, we won't know about it for a few weeks. We won't know about any sort of large-scale bot network or anything like that. They hide their tracks very well because they didn't do it very well in 2016. But what we do know is they are really focused on pounding propaganda internally right now to drum up support for this war that there does not appear to be full-throated support for in this country. People are risking their lives. People are risking, in one case, their child, their baby, to go protest in Russia right now against this war because they have family in Ukraine. They know Ukrainians personally. So that's why they're trying to drum up support internally, and they're closing off dissent as well. Trying to close off Facebook, by the way, is not just trying to close off any sort of alternative media from outside the country. It's trying to close off any sort of organizational methods, using Messenger and things like that too. So that's what the focus of the propaganda right now is nationally. We might get some too, and I'm sure it will happen, especially if we go on the offense in terms of some sort of cyber warfare. But right now it's inside Russia.
Olga, we've heard Ukrainian leaders liken this invasion to 1939 when the Nazis invaded. Others have likened it to the Soviet takeovers of Hungary in '56, Czechoslovakia in '68. Is there a historical parallel to this, or is Putin in a class by himself?
No, there definitely is a historical parallel. The person that he most tries to emulate is Stalin. I mean, he's, made very comments about it over the decades of, how he liked his rule and whatnot. Even the attack on Ukraine, it was done right before 5 o'clock. And during 1930, well, not 1939, but when Germany invaded Russia, they invaded them, Soviet Union, at 4 a.m. So, I mean, and they had put out a rumor, speaking of disinformation, they circulated a rumor on Telegram that the invasion was going to begin at 4 a.m. So they specifically used the time that Germany invaded the Soviet Union as when they were going to start. They waited a few, 40 minutes more.
Ben, I know that one of the things that has always fascinated you in disinformation is the intersectionality of it. You have been tracking the right-wing trucker protests that started in Canada. They are now popping up here in the U.S. And while lots of high-profile conservatives, including Trump and Putin, are on the Putin bandwagon, you say that's not quite coming through in the chats that truckers are having online. What are you seeing, and what could it mean? Because these things often serve as an echo chamber. They hear something in, right-wing media. It is echoed by Trump. It makes its way into these types of protests. We see them come here to the United States in various chat forums, but you're not necessarily seeing that pro-Putin echo in these trucker protests.
Yeah, in the last year, there's been this bisection of the Trump right from, the trucker convoy style Sean Hannity right and the Tucker Carlson style Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance, I would call it the edgelord right, the very online right. And the trucker convoy right is against Putin. They don't like the guy. They are obviously against Biden as well. They think he's weak, all of this stuff. They want to protest his policies. But they don't like the idea of this interventionism from Vladimir Putin. They like a strongman up to a point until he's killing civilians, basically. And that's where it gets really tricky, because the Tucker Carlson right loves Vladimir Putin. They love a strongman. Right. They love imperialism. They love the concept of taking over other places. And that's going to drive a wedge here. Donald Trump is if he's going to have to bring these two sides together, the more, frankly, the more normal side, the side that is closer to the average American here is that trucker convoy, unfortunately here. And that side does not want to stand with Vladimir Putin in any way.
Olga, really quickly here, what is the public sentiment inside Russia right now? What is your reading of the situation? Do we have a good grasp of just how much there is dissent against Vladimir Putin and this war?
There definitely is dissent. I mean, look, I'm from the region. I follow the Kremlin forever. I do not ever remember him being schooling an SVR head. I mean, that was incredible. As far as the people, the repression inside has been absolutely, I mean, insane. They have brought back Soviet tactics to the point that they're throwing dissidents into mental institutions and, for sluggish schizophrenia, which was a very popular Soviet practice. But now it is, split. There is a percentage who is completely on board what Putin is doing. And then you see a huge percentage of, going against Putin at the risk of their own lives.
All right, Ben Collins, Olga Lautman, thank you so much for joining us. Greatly appreciate your insights, guys. Still to come, a legacy in the making. President Biden nominates the first black woman to the United States Supreme Court. A look at Ketanji Brown Jackson and what kind of justice she will be. We're going to talk about it after the break. Stay with us. All right, we turn now to some breaking news here at home. President Biden today ended a month-long search to replace Justice Stephen Breyer, calling on Ketanji Brown Jackson to become the 116th justice in the Supreme Court's 233-year history. Judge Jackson once clerked for the retiring justice. She now seeks to replace. And in remarks today, Biden called her someone worthy of Breyer's legacy and decency.
In the end, someone with extraordinary character will bring to the Supreme Court an independent mind, uncompromising integrity, and with a strong moral compass and the courage to stand up for what she thinks is right.
Judge Jackson's confirmation would not change the court's ideological balance. We should note conservatives appointed by Republicans still retain a 6-3 majority. It would, however, achieve a number of firsts, making the announcement historic in more ways than one. Most notably, Judge Jackson would become the first black woman to sit on the Supreme Court. She would also be the first former public defender. And in another first, if confirmed, all sitting justices appointed by Democratic presidents would be women. It is important to note that Judge Jackson has already been twice confirmed as a judge by the Senate, including just last year, when 3 Republicans voted yes to approve her elevation to the powerful U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. Now, it's partly why President Biden closed his remarks today by saying he hoped the Senate would move promptly and fairly. But the reaction from the right, as you can imagine, sets the stage for what looks to be a difficult confirmation fight. Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the minority leader, initially congratulated Judge Jackson on her nomination before going on to note, quote, "I voted against confirming Judge Jackson to her current position less than a year ago. I also understand Judge Jackson was the favored choice of far-left dark money groups that have spent years attacking the legitimacy and structure of the court itself." Meanwhile, South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham said her appointment means the radical left has won. This, despite the fact that that very same person, Senator Lindsey Graham, was one of the 3 Republicans who actually voted to confirm her just last year. What has changed, Senator? Joining us now is Judith Brown-Dianis. She is the executive director of the Advancement Project, which works to combat structural racism in education, policing, and criminal justice. Thank you so much for joining us. First, one of the many, as I mentioned there, one of the many firsts for Judge Jackson includes her being the first former public defender to potentially become a Supreme Court justice. And it's raised a lot of questions on the significance of that. What would it mean to add a Supreme Court justice with her kind of experience as a public defender?
Right. Well, typically the justices go through the path, the career path is that they are prosecutors before they are elevated to the courts and then to the Supreme Court. So for the first time, we will have someone sitting on the Supreme Court who sees the criminal legal system from the other side of the coin. She has represented people who have seen how broken our criminal legal system is. And so that's very important. In addition to which, she was on the U.S. Sentencing Commission. So she saw how mandatory minimums were not working. And then she went and she worked to represent people in the criminal legal system. So that's important because this court will see issues around search and seizure, will see issues around policing. They see death penalties come before them. And so having that experience is critical.
There's no doubt that she has received a lot of praise for the historic nomination. Former President Obama took to Twitter to congratulate Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, saying in part, "Judge Jackson has already inspired young black women like my daughters to set their sights higher, and her confirmation will help them believe they can be anything they want to be." Aside from the significance of the symbolism of her being the first nomination, potentially the first black woman justice, what about her adjudicating style will make her presence on the court significant, even though ideologically it does not change the balance of the court from 6-3? But what about her presence and her style could have an impact inside the deliberating process?
Well, life experience matters on the court because they're people first. And so the fact that she is a Black woman means that she is bringing kind of this intersection of race and gender and understanding her life experiences, but also how it impacts the law and the interpretation of the law. And as you can imagine, the other thing that happens is that the judges get together and they deliberate. And so she will bring her story and her lens to the discussions that they will have in the Supreme Court. And as you mentioned, we still are going to be in a situation where we have a court that is 6-3, 6 meaning that they are on the right wing part of the court. But also important is that we see decisions and dissents from Justice Sotomayor, and she will probably join in a lot of those. And they're important. Those dissents give us a way forward in the law. They also become the conscience of the court. And so I'm looking forward to reading those dissents, and at some point we will flip the court.
Yeah, those dissents have become mandatory reading for anyone who does follow the Supreme Court, especially ahead of some critical decisions expected later this year. Judith Brown-Dianis, thank you so much for joining us. I greatly appreciate your insights. I want to turn now to Congressman Mondaire Jones. He represents New York's 17th Congressional District. He is a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thank you so much. It's good to see you. Great to finally have you on the program. I want to quickly put up that headline we just showed about Lindsey Graham's hypocrisy here. It is something that also caught your attention because you took to Twitter saying that you're going to enjoy watching every interview in which Lindsey Graham is asked how he could possibly have concerns about voting to confirm Judge Jackson for SCOTUS when he voted to confirm her for the D.C. Circuit just a few months ago. How in the world is he going to try to pull the rabbit out of the hat and square this circle?
Well, you can't put anything past Lindsey Graham or any of the Republicans in the Senate these days, but I think he's going to have difficulty if he tries to pursue this line of thinking about how to approach Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation hearing. This is someone who has impeccable qualifications, as you know, to the point where people are just really grasping at straws, including folks who just voted to confirm her to the D.C. Circuit a few months ago, like Lindsey Graham.
I want to pretend that Republicans surprise me with what they say in terms of the timeline of this nomination, but they have no shame left, so I am not surprised, to be honest with you. Mitch McConnell and others saying they want to see a robust process. The very same people who confirmed Amy Coney Barrett while an election was happening. What do you make of just the general hypocrisy from the right about this nomination?
I listened to what Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had to say about how progressives have somehow been attacking the structure of the court and the integrity of the court. And I think to myself, isn't this the guy who just rushed through the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett as votes had already been cast and the presidential election was underway? And of course, when he did that, he went back on the rule that he had made up just prior when he held a vacancy for 14 months after the untimely death of Justice Antonin Scalia. So you just cannot make this stuff up. And of course, this is all going to come out in the confirmation hearing. And it's on people like myself and folks in the media to expose the hypocrisy of the far right, of which Mitch McConnell, when it comes to the Supreme Court in particular, has been at the helm.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting point about that, and we have to keep that in mind as this process plays out. I want to ask you the same question I asked Judith there for a second. Ideologically speaking, the court does not change from 6-3, but the importance of having Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson could be significant, as we just heard. What is your take on the role she can play in a court that leans 6-3?
I had a law school professor who unfortunately recently passed away, and she was probably the foremost civil rights scholar of our time. Her name is Lonnie Guinier, and she wrote very powerfully, and she spoke very powerfully about the impact that people can have in dissent, right? Powerful dissents, we already know, can galvanize the American people around a project, around shared values. In this case, the right to protect democracy itself, which is under assault by the far right 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. In this case, of course, the fundamental right of a woman to choose what to do with her own body, which faces its greatest assault in generations as Roe v. Wade is on the chopping block this very Supreme Court term. So there is a lot at stake. There's a lot that a future Justice Jackson can do to galvanize. But of course, make no mistake, we have got to restore balance to the court by adding 4 seats so that we can save these fundamental rights.
Yeah, you bring up my final question to you really quickly about reforming the court and expanding the court. Is that gaining traction? I noticed something you have been championing. It seems the president, for now, has cooled off on pushing through those reforms.
Well, he's got a lot on his plate, to be sure. I'm inspired and encouraged by the fact that now my Judiciary Act, along with Hank Johnson and Jerry Nadler, we introduced this on April 15th of last year, has over 50 co-sponsors in Congress. And of course, Senator Elizabeth Warren just signed on to it. This is important democracy-saving, rights-saving legislation. The American people are now on our side. There was a poll done in September of last year showing that 56% of Americans support adding seats to the court to protect reproductive freedoms. So we're on the right track. We just got to speed up that process before it's too late.
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of the most important pieces of legislation that we can pass to shore up our democracy. Congressman Mondaire Jones, great to see you. Thanks for coming on. That does it for me tonight. I'll see you back on MSNBC starting tomorrow at 8 p.m. for more extended live coverage of the crisis in Ukraine. For now, good night from New York.
With Ukrainian officials, it's fair to say that they are also calling on all the Western allies and all the partners of Ukraine to toughen up the sanctions, to do more, to help more, and also not only the sanctions. This is very important here. There are calls from Ukrainian officials to help with weapons, to help with air defense systems. And Ukrainian media, you know, they're covering the situation in very tough conditions, of course, because the offensive operation is on. I'm not sure if you can hear now, but I can clearly hear the explosions. I am currently in Kiev, and we can hear them during the day all the time, and the sirens going off. So that's the spirit. And for the allies, do toughen up the sanctions and do help more with weapons and the air defense systems.
Well, whether or not, you know, this extra and further support from the international community does come, we're learning that, you know, adult men between 18 and 60 years old who have had basic military training, well, they're being banned from leaving Ukraine. What more can you tell us about that?
Definitely, this is part of the martial law that was introduced yesterday morning in the very first hours and minutes of Russian invasion, in the very early hours of this war that Russia proclaimed for Ukraine. And the men really cannot leave the country nowadays. They're banned from doing so. They're invited to come and help defend their country, to help to protect the country, to protect their families, their wives, their mothers, their children. And I have to tell you that not so many men are leaving. So many across the country are signing up as volunteers to do so.
US President Joe Biden held a call with Ukraine's embattled leader on Friday. President Zelensky thanked the US for its sanctions against Russia and its continued defense assistance. Well, let's now cross over to Washington, D.C. and speak to Ray Suarez. Okay, so Ray, we heard there that President Biden has spoken to President Zelensky. What more can you tell us about what they spoke about and the assurances that Biden gave?
Well, President Zelensky has been very critical of the United States response over the last 72 hours. Not always the United States specifically, but the West in general, and pronounced Ukraine standing alone and asked for more assistance. It's at one point in a message to the EU dramatically said that this might be the last time that he was seen alive. So this is a significant change in tone to thank the U.S. for its support. And also important to keep those lines of communications open, as it seems to be that this is going to be a fairly long crisis, not something that's wrapped up for one side or the other in just a day or 2 or 3 days. Right now, the United States continues to put men and materiel in the eastern regions of NATO and get ready for a large number of expected Ukrainian refugees coming west across Ukraine's borders. Mariam?
Now, we know that the US has now joined the EU in directly sanctioning President Putin and Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov. How effective do you think these sanctions are going to be?
Well, sanctions against individual Russians were part of the American design of its sanctions plan from the beginning, when they said they didn't want to hurt ordinary Russians with more broad-based measures, but target specific elites inside Russia. And of course, Sergei Lavrov and President Putin himself are the elites of the elites. Now, in the last 30 years, a lot of men have gotten extremely rich in Russia. But Russia hasn't been a great place to park that wealth, as we've seen with the cratering Russian stock market and the ruble at its lowest value historically. So they have tended to keep that wealth outside the country in pounds sterling, in euros, and in dollars. This leaves men like President Putin, rumored to be one of the richest men in the world, particularly vulnerable to the kinds of sanctions announced by both the EU and now matched by the Biden administration in Washington. Whether this is a pinch point, whether this is something that will, in the short term, really pressure the president remains to be seen. We've got a Russian leader now talking about Nazis and dope addicts in the capital in Kiev. It's hard to figure out exactly how rational or how self-interested he is at this point, whether personal sanctions that go after his wealth and the enormous amount of money he's got squirreled away outside the country is really going to change anything in the short term. Mariam?
Great analysis, as always. Ray Suarez in DC, thank you so much. EU foreign ministers have met in Brussels to pass another raft of sanctions on Russia. Now, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine on Thursday, the bloc proposed punitive measures against Moscow. The sanctions target Russia's energy, financial and aviation industries. The EU's Foreign Affairs Minister, Joseph Borrell, said they have also approved the freezing of assets owned by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
As you know, in a sign of immediate support for Ukraine, we have adopted a sanctions package which was agreed last night by the leaders of the member states. You know that the European Council provides political guidance in order for the Council of the Foreign Affairs Ministers of the European states approve formally and put that into actions. We have listed today President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov.
Now from Brussels, Shona Murray says there are questions being asked as to why the EU is not taking SWIFT, the international banking system, off.
There was a strong expectation, we spoke about it a couple of hours ago, that the SWIFT payment system would be on the sanctions list. There was hope that there was unanimity on that. It requires unanimity. That wasn't able to happen this time round. Joseph Borrell said it's still on the table for perhaps a third round of sanctions, but it's very disappointing, I think, for many people who felt that this set of sanctions, although they are far-reaching and they're the largest set of sanctions the EU has ever implemented, they seem to have fallen flat and they seem to have disappointed. We heard commentary from the likes of Donald Tusk, the former president of the European Council, who said the countries that were against putting SWIFT on the set of sanctions, that they had disgraced themselves.
So a little bit of disappointment there that SWIFT hasn't made the sanctions list. Now, the EU, it's told Ukraine that it's not alone. We've seen, of course, these financial sanctions. But the Ukrainian President Zelensky says more help is needed. So how far do you think Brussels could go? Could SWIFT actually make it onto that sanctions list eventually? And when and why?
Yeah, I mean, unanimity is the problem here because countries, Germany, Italy, Hungary, don't want to have it so far. But Joseph Borrell did hold out hope that eventually could get on it for the next round. The question is, what does Putin have to do to get a third round of sanctions, to get the SWIFT financial transactions on the list? That's a huge question. We know tonight at the UN Security Council, France is putting forward a resolution condemning Russia for the violence. Obviously, Russia will veto that, but it's hoped that the rest of the General Assembly will vote in favour of condemning Russia, because the EU, again, is not a military organisation. It's an organisation of 27 member states. The tools that they have is sanctions, and so that's really as far as it can go.
Now, NATO will send more troops to the borders of Eastern Europe. The plan was announced by the Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg following a special leaders' summit to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The move comes after Poland called for the alliance's forces in the east to be boosted. Together with Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, and Poland requested the emergency meeting to discuss Article 4, which covers the security of any parties of the alliance that is threatened. And Stoltenberg says the alliance has already strengthened its defence.
We are deploying elements of the NATO response force on land, at sea and in the air to further strengthen our posture and to respond quickly to any contingency. The United States, Canada and European allies have deployed thousands of more troops to the eastern part of the alliance. We have over 100 jets at high alert operating in over 30 different locations, and over 120 ships from the high north to the Mediterranean, including 3 strike carrier groups.
Well, we're going to take a short break, but still to come on Euronews Now. We'll be heading over to Matthew in the Cube.
Amid the attack on Ukraine and growing opposition online, Russia says it has partially restricted Facebook. We'll be taking a look after the break.
We need to develop and deploy breakthrough technologies.
The Internet of Things and big ideas.
Artificial intelligence is one of the big technology game changers.
Let's find out more.
Welcome back to the programme. Russian forces are advancing on several fronts across Ukraine, from the east, south and north. Now, Friday morning brought reports that troops had reached the outskirts of Kiev by Friday night. There are also reports of artillery fire and explosions in the capital. Well, President Zelensky has called on civilians to take up arms, and he was out on the streets of Kiev to show that he's not leaving anytime soon. Now, for more on how the military situation is unfolding, we're joined by Brad Bowman, Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a former US National Security Defense Advisor. Mr. Bowman, thank you so much for joining us on the programme tonight. Now, the US says that there's a real possibility that the capital, Kiev, will fall. How important is the capture of the capital for Russia?
It's incredibly important. Putin's objective here is, in this unprovoked aggression, the most significant military invasion or action since World War II in Europe. His objective here is to decapitate the duly elected government of Ukraine. His forces are closing in on Kyiv as we speak. Ukrainians are fighting and dying to defend their freedom. And he would like to replace Zelensky, almost certainly, with a Russian stooge. So let me repeat that. We're looking at the most significant military attack in Europe since World War II, and it's an authoritarian aggressor trying to overthrow a duly elected government. This truly is a decisive moment in the conflict, in my view, between freedom and authoritarianism, between the rule of law and a might makes right oppression.
Well, let's break down Russia's attack then. We know that they are, of course, attacking Ukraine on many flanks. It also dominates the airspace. So talk us through this sort of multi-pronged approach by Russia.
Sure. At risk of oversimplifying, we're looking at two pincer movements by the invading Russian forces. One pincer is one element of the first pincer is coming from Crimea. Isn't that ironic? It's Russians in occupied Ukraine, Crimea, coming and attacking up toward the north and to the east. And then the other side of that pincer is coming from the northeast, from Russia. Those two pincers are coming together, and then the forces, the Russian-backed forces in the Donbass region, Luhansk and Donetsk, are trying to pin Ukrainian forces. The goal of that first pincer movement is to surround and destroy as much as possible of the Ukrainian military, and most of the Ukrainian military is in the east of the country. The other pincer movement is coming from the north, primarily from Belarus, and one side of that pincer is coming down one side of the Dnieper River, one side is coming down the other. That pincer movement is focused on surrounding and presumably moving into the capital of Kyiv in order to overthrow the democratic government of Ukraine.
Now, you talk there about, Russia really locking Ukraine into these pincer movements. This is, of course, a stronger Ukrainian army than it was in 2014. But, of course, Russia's military their military capabilities really do dwarf Ukraine's. So they're outgunned, they're outnumbered. But how can they really maneuver and reposition themselves to take on these Russian forces?
Thank you for that. Every major metric of military power, there is no comparison between the Russian military and the Ukrainian military. The Ukrainian forces have dramatically improved, as you suggested, since 2014. They're much better than they were, and they're also combat hardened because they've been fighting this Russian-backed separatist movement in the Donbass since 2014, where roughly 14,000 Ukrainians have died. But the Russian military has also undertaken a massive military modernization effort. But with that said, the Ukrainian people are a free people defending their homes. And in my review of history suggests you should never underestimate the will and determination of a free people to defend their country. And so if Vladimir Putin thinks this is going to be easy, he's going to be sorely mistaken. And even if they can take the capital rather quickly and try to put in a Russian puppet atop the government, to keep that puppet in place, they're going to have to keep Russian forces there. And those Russian forces will be subjects of Ukrainian attacks, which means more Russian casualties going back to Russia and more protests like we've seen in Russia in recent days.
OK, well, Brad Berman, as Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Thank you so much. Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of St. Petersburg to voice their anger over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. On Thursday, more than 1,500 arrests were made by Russian police during anti-war rallies across the country. Russian media are reporting that the authorities made more arrests on Friday. Other major cities across the world have also held similar anti-war demonstrations. Well, amid the attack on Ukraine, Russia has announced that it is partially restricting access to Facebook. Matthew in the Cube has more.
This was announced by Russia's state communications watchdog. Let me take you straight to the statement. They said they had taken action after the US tech giant had imposed limits on a number of Russian state media channels. Articles, photos and other pieces of content have been labelled as unreliable. This, of course, comes amid widespread coverage of Russia's attack on Ukraine. But as you can see here, the Russian state authorities said that they had taken this measure to protect Russian media outlets. And from Friday, Facebook would be partially restricted unless those limits on those Russian media channels were lifted. Now, another reason that you should note this is this comes, of course, amid a growing online movement in Russia. A number of younger citizens, as well as several well-known celebrities, have been sharing this hashtag, which literally translates #NoToWar. Many people expressing their condemnation of President Vladimir Putin and accusing him of warmongering amid this invasion of Ukraine. Other people on Facebook in Russia have been changing their avatars to either the Ukrainian flag or other symbols and graphics to show their support for Ukraine's freedom. Now, it's not the first time that Facebook or indeed any other social media channels have been limited in Russia. But Mariam, the timing, of course, this time is particularly significant. It's not exactly clear how much this restriction will affect Facebook in Russia. But once again, you see the Moscow and the Kremlin trying to control the narrative amid fighting on the ground in Ukraine and an online propaganda war as well.
We'll take a short break here, but still to come.